Captain Avery Monroe leaned against the reinforced wall of the forward U.S. military base in Doha, sipping a lukewarm cup of coffee. Outside, the desert sun burned low over the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and crimson. It was quiet, or at least deceptively so. Avery had learned in her years of service that calm was often the prelude to chaos. Her eyes scanned the latest intelligence reports on her tablet. Satellite imagery, intercepted communications, and diplomatic cables all pointed to the same grim conclusion. Conflict with Iran was imminent. Political negotiations had failed yet again, and both sides were mobilizing. Air bases were on high alert, drones were in the air, and naval fleets were repositioning near the Strait of Hormuz. For most, this was news to be monitored. For Avery, it was personal. She had been trained to anticipate the unimaginable, and yet nothing had prepared her for what lay ahead. A chime on her comms device snapped her attention back to reality. It was a secure message from command. Monroe, prepare for immediate deployment. Mission coordinates and objectives encrypted. ETA, 2 hours. Avery's pulse quickened. Deployments weren't unusual, but the timing and the tone of the message spoke volumes. This wasn't a routine mission. This was a leap into the eye of the storm. She grabbed her gear, rifle, combat knife, survival kit, and her armored vest. Each item had its place, each item a potential lifeline. Her mind raced as she reviewed the preliminary mission brief. She was being sent to a high-risk intelligence operation near the Iranian border, a region thick with enemy patrols and anti-air defenses. The objective was simple on paper, gather intel, but the risks were monumental. Many had tried similar missions, not all had returned. As Avery walked toward the helicopter landing pad, the base's hum of activity seemed strangely distant. Soldiers moved with mechanical precision, vehicles rumbled across the desert, and drones whirred overhead scanning the sands for threats. Yet amidst all this, Avery felt an unnerving solitude. She was about to be thrust into chaos alone, relying not just on her training, but on her instincts, her wits, and sheer willpower. The helicopter blades sliced through the air as she approached. She climbed aboard, fastening her harness with practiced efficiency. The pilot, a grizzled veteran with eyes that had seen too many battles, nodded briefly. "You ready for this, Monroe?" Avery didn't answer. Words were unnecessary. Her grip on her rifle tightened as the helicopter lifted off, the desert falling away beneath her. The wind whipped through the open doors, carrying with it the dry scent of sand and smoke from distant skirmishes. She stared out at the horizon, mentally preparing for the unknown. As the helicopter sped toward the mission zone, her mind wandered, not in distraction, but in calculation. Every possible scenario played out in rapid succession: ambushes, airstrikes, drone attacks, collapsing infrastructure. Each scenario required a response, and each response carried consequences. Avery's mind was a battlefield before the real battle had even begun. Hours passed. The sun dipped below the horizon, leaving the desert in deepening shadows. The mission zone loomed ahead, jagged mountains and valleys carved like scars across the earth. Avery's heart pounded in rhythm with the helicopter's rotor. Then, the unexpected: radar blips. Multiple fast-moving contacts closing in, enemy drones, likely patrol units, closing on their flight path. "Contact, front and left," the pilot called out, adjusting their route. Avery's training kicked in instinctively. She scanned for threats, pinpointed likely ambush points, and considered escape vectors. Every muscle tensed, every sense sharpened. The helicopter landed in a small clearing, dust erupting around them like a storm. Avery's heart pounded as her eyes locked onto the shadow darting across the ridge. She crouched lower, breath shallow, mind sharpening. For a soldier, training sometimes felt instinctual, but fear was an ever-present companion, especially when isolated and deep in enemy territory. Her pulse thrummed in rhythm with the distant explosions echoing across the desert valleys below. Suddenly, the shadow materialized into two armed figures, moving cautiously toward her position. Avery didn't hesitate. She activated her comms device, whispering a coded alert, but knew full well that radio silence would likely be enforced if conflict erupted. This wasn't just reconnaissance anymore. She was in the enemy's backyard, and any misstep could be fatal. The figures moved closer, scanning the rocky terrain with precision. Avery ducked behind a jagged boulder, watching their movements. They were Iranian special forces, trained to patrol these high-risk zones. Each step they took brought them closer to her and closer to danger. Avery's fingers tightened around her rifle. She wasn't planning to engage unless necessary, but she had already calculated escape routes, hand signals, and fallback positions. A sudden distant explosion startled the patrol. One of the soldiers dropped to the sand instinctively, and Avery seized the distraction. She moved silently, hugging the shadows, weaving through the rocks and debris. The wind carried the metallic scent of smoke and dust, and somewhere far below, the desert itself seemed to rumble with the chaos of war. Hours passed in tense silence as Avery navigated toward a ridge overlooking a narrow valley. She scanned the terrain through her binoculars. Convoys of enemy vehicles moved like clockwork below, guarded by sniper teams and drone patrols. Civilians, caught in the wrong place at the wrong time, fled wherever they could. Avery's mission was to gather intelligence, but the sight of human suffering tightened her chest. Every image, every coordinate she recorded was now a lifeline for her country, but also a testament to the war's indiscriminate cruelty. The moment of quiet was shattered by gunfire. Automatic weapons crackled from the valley below. Avery ducked instinctively, heart racing. Dust and debris flew around her. A convoy of U.S. supply vehicles had been ambushed by a small enemy unit. The soldiers were pinned down, returning fire but clearly outnumbered. Avery's first instinct was to call in support, but she was still outside radio range. She realized with stark clarity that she was truly alone. Adrenaline surged. Avery began moving carefully down the rocky slope, using every bit of terrain for cover. Her goal was simple: gather what intel she could and reach the designated extraction points, yet the path was fraught with danger. Patrols moved with methodical precision, and drones scanned the valley relentlessly. Every shadow was a potential threat. Every sound could be her last warning. It was during this descent that Avery encountered a small group of survivors, a mix of civilians, injured soldiers, and a few frightened local guides. Their eyes widened when they saw her, some in fear, others in relief. Avery assessed the group quickly. They were scared, disoriented, and unarmed, but they were alive. "You're coming with me," she said firmly, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. "Stick close, don't make a sound, move when I move." The group nodded, trusting the authority in her tone. Avery led them through narrow canyons and bombed-out villages, moving like a shadow across the terrain. The drones above scanned constantly, their faint whirring a reminder that the enemy could strike at any moment. Every step was calculated, every decision carried the weight of life and death. Night fell, and with it, new dangers emerged. The group found temporary shelter, the ruins of a half-destroyed warehouse. Avery kept watch while others tried to rest, her eyes scanning every broken beam, every doorway. The cold desert night bit through their clothing, and the occasional distant gunfire reminded them that the battlefield extended far beyond their immediate view. As she crouched in the shadows, Avery reflected briefly on her life before this nightmare. Family dinners, quiet nights in small-town America, training drills that seemed tedious at the time. Now, those memories were a distant echo. Survival demanded every ounce of focus, skill, and courage she could muster. She couldn't afford nostalgia, not here, not now. A sudden noise, a rustle of sand behind the warehouse, made her freeze. She grabbed her rifle and gestured for silence. The civilians huddled together, fear in their eyes. Avery crept toward the sound, moving like a predator stalking prey. From the darkness emerged a lone enemy scout, unaware of her presence. Avery held her breath, weighing her options: take the shot and risk exposing her position, or let him pass and hope for the best. She waited, calculating the timing, then gave a soft whistle, a signal to the group. They moved silently, slipping away through a back exit of the warehouse, leaving the scout unaware. Avery exhaled quietly, the tension leaving her body only slightly. Each encounter like this was a stark reminder that one wrong move could cost her life or the lives of those she had sworn to protect. By dawn, Avery and the group were forced to cross an open stretch of desert. The morning light revealed the devastation of the previous night's bombings. Smoke spiraled into the sky, marking recent strikes. Avery led the group low to the ground, moving in short bursts from cover to cover. Distant gunfire echoed like a grim soundtrack to their desperate journey. They reached a ridge that provided a vantage point over the valley. Avery peered through her binoculars, noting enemy patrols, vehicle movements, and drone paths. She recorded coordinates and marked potential hazards. The extraction point was still miles away, and Avery knew that reaching it would require navigating a gauntlet of hostile territory. Suddenly, the sound of rotors cut through the morning haze. Avery froze. Helicopters hovered in the distance, their shapes silhouetted against the rising sun. Rescue or ambush? She didn't know. Her training screamed caution, but her instincts demanded action. She gathered the group behind a cluster of rocks, signaling them to stay low. Every second was a gamble. Every decision could mean life or death. The morning stretched into tense waiting, each second punctuated by distant explosions, gunfire, and the eerie whirring of drones. Avery kept the group moving slowly, every movement deliberate. The desert had become an unforgiving maze, and the enemy was everywhere. She realized that this was only the beginning of her nightmare, and that surviving today meant being ready for whatever horrors awaited her tomorrow. End of Part 2, Cliffhanger. Just as the group neared the edge of the valley, a missile streaked across the sky, crashing somewhere behind them with a deafening roar. Avery spun, rifle ready, eyes scanning the horizon. The enemy had found them, and there was no turning back. Avery's lungs burned as she sprinted across the jagged desert terrain, the echoes of the missile strike still rumbling in her chest. The small group she had taken under her wings stumbled behind her, terrified, exhausted, but trusting her implicitly. The valley below was chaos incarnate. Smoke spiraled from burning vehicles, distant gunfire crackled like thunder, and the low hum of enemy drones patrolled the skies above. Every second felt like a lifetime, every step a negotiation with death. By mid-morning, the group reached a narrow canyon, a jagged corridor of rock that offered some cover, but none of the safety they desperately needed. Avery crouched low, her eyes scanning every crevice, every shadow. She could feel it. They were being hunted. The enemy was closing in, and there was no reinforcements, no extraction, no guarantees. Her first priority was keeping the group alive. She divided the civilians into pairs, whispering instructions. Stay quiet. Move only when I move. Keep your heads down. Don't look up. A young local guide, barely 16, stumbled beside her. Avery grabbed his arm, steadying him. You're stronger than you think. Trust me. Her words felt like a lie, even as she tried to convince herself. The group moved slowly through the canyon, avoiding debris and fallen rocks. Then came the first ambush. A hail of gunfire erupted from the canyon walls, bullets striking rocks and sand with terrifying precision. Avery pushed the civilians down, returning fire only when necessary, using short, calculated bursts. Her heart hammered as she moved like a shadow, leading the group away from the line of fire. Go! 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 She shouted, adrenaline drowning out fear. The canyon became a gauntlet, every turn a potential death trap. Somewhere above them, enemy snipers tracked their movements. She could hear the faint whir of drones adjusting their flight paths, scanning for heat signatures. Hours passed. Hunger, thirst, and exhaustion weighed heavily on the group. The civilians were scared, and some of the soldiers she had saved were injured, unable to keep pace. Avery assessed the situation quickly. There was no choice. They could not wait. They had to keep moving, or they would be cut down. She found temporary shelter in the ruins of a bombed-out village. The walls were crumbling, the roof partially collapsed, but it offered the group a few hours to rest. Avery took first watch, rifle at the ready, eyes scanning the darkness for movement. Every shadow could conceal a sniper, every sound could be an enemy patrol. Sleep was impossible. During the long night, Avery replayed her life in her mind, every mission, every training drill, every choice that had led her to this moment. She thought of her family back home, their letters, their photographs. She thought of the soldiers she had lost in previous deployments. War had a way of stripping humanity down to raw survival, and she knew this night would leave scars she could never erase. At dawn, the group continued their trek. Avery led them across a ridge, the desert stretching endlessly before them. She noticed tracks, fresh footprints. Someone had been here recently, likely enemy patrols. She signaled for silence, crouching low behind a rock. The civilians huddled together, trembling. Avery took a deep breath, forcing her mind into sharp focus. The enemy patrols were fast approaching. There was no time for hesitation. She had to act, and act decisively. Avery devised a diversion. She set a small, controlled explosion in a nearby pile of debris, sending dust and smoke into the air. The enemy soldiers reacted immediately, moving toward the disturbance. Avery seized the opportunity. She led the group along a narrow, hidden path, navigating cliffs and crevices, hearts pounding with every step. By mid-afternoon, the group stumbled into a canyon lake, a rare source of water in this desert. Avery distributed what little they had, careful to ration. She encouraged the civilians, telling them to drink sparingly to conserve their energy. Every decision mattered. Every action could determine whether they survived. But survival was a constant struggle. A sudden aerial drone swooped low, scanning the area for heat signatures. Avery pushed the group into thick brush, pressing them against the rocky terrain. Her own heartbeat seemed deafening in her ears. The drone hovered for what felt like an eternity, then passed. Avery exhaled slowly, realizing that even in the briefest moments of safety, fear never left her side. As evening fell, Avery decided they needed to move again. The extraction point was still miles away, and lingering in one place increased the risk of discovery. She led them through treacherous mountain paths, the sun setting behind jagged cliffs. Darkness brought both cover and danger. They navigated by starlight, relying on Avery's instincts and survival skills. Suddenly, a scream shattered the night. One of the civilians, a young woman, had tripped over loose rocks, twisting her ankle. Avery rushed to her side, assessing the injury. The enemy was not far behind. Every second mattered. With no time to spare, Avery fashioned a makeshift splint and helped the woman to her feet. Survival meant moving forward, even when it hurt, even when it seemed impossible. Hours later, Avery spotted a faint glimmer of light on the distant horizon. Perhaps a village, perhaps rescue, perhaps another trap. She didn't know. She only knew that they had to reach it, no matter the cost. She tightened her grip on her rifle, signaling the group to move in single file. As they crested the final ridge before the lights, they were met with an unexpected obstacle, a heavily armed enemy patrol blocking their path. Avery froze. She could not risk a direct confrontation. She scanned the terrain quickly, calculating alternative routes. One wrong decision now would mean death, for her, for the civilians, for everyone she had vowed to protect. With calm precision, Avery led the group along a narrow, hidden path to the side of the ridge, keeping low and silent. Every step was a gamble, every breath a countdown. The enemy was oblivious, focused on the valley below. Slowly, methodically, they passed. As they reached the edge of the ridge, Avery paused, looking back at the trail they had traversed. The desert stretched endlessly, filled with chaos and destruction. She knew that the nightmare was far from over, but for this moment, they had survived. End of Part 3, Cliffhanger. Just as relief began to settle over the group, a distant explosion rocked the ridge behind them. Avery spun, rifle raised. Flames lit up the sky. The enemy had found them again, and there was no turning back. The explosion behind them lit the night sky like a fiery warning. Avery's heart pounded in her chest, her instincts screaming. The group froze for a heartbeat. Then Avery barked orders, her voice cutting through the chaos. "Move! Keep low! Stay close!" The desert terrain had become a maze of fire, smoke, and debris, each step a potential trap. Civilians stumbled, soldiers groaned in pain, and Avery pressed forward, scanning constantly for threats. She knew the enemy would pursue relentlessly. There was no time to rest, no time for hesitation. Every second mattered. Ahead, a narrow canyon promised temporary cover. Avery led the group through it, navigating jagged rocks and hidden drop-offs. She carried an injured soldier over her shoulder, urging the civilians to follow her lead. Her mind was sharp, calculating routes, anticipating enemy positions, and rationing the dwindling water supply. Hours stretched into a grueling night. Exhaustion gnawed at them all, but Avery refused to stop. Every decision was a balance between speed and stealth. One wrong move could mean capture or death. Every rustle in the darkness triggered heightened alert. Her senses were razor sharp, every instinct honed to survival. By early morning, the first light revealed the aftermath of a brutal battlefield. Destroyed vehicles, scattered debris, and the distant silhouettes of enemy patrols. Avery scanned the horizon. The extraction point was near, but they still had to cross a heavily patrolled area. She knelt behind a boulder, studying the enemy's movements. There were too many for a direct confrontation. Avery's solution was daring: create a diversion to draw them away from the path. She rigged a small explosive from leftover supplies, placing it among a cluster of rocks. With a deep breath, she triggered it. The blast echoed through the canyon, smoke and fire rising into the pale morning sky. Enemy soldiers reacted immediately, rushing toward the noise. Avery seized the opportunity, leading the group along a hidden path through rocky terrain. The civilians stumbled, but she encouraged them with quiet words, keeping their focus. Every movement was tense, every step calculated. They were running on sheer willpower, survival instincts guiding each motion. Hours later, they reached a narrow valley. Avery spotted a faint glimmer in the distance, a helicopter approaching, its rotors slicing through the sky. Hope surged in her chest, but she knew better than to trust it blindly. Rescue often came with danger attached. She signaled for the group to halt and pressed herself against the rocks, eyes scanning for threats. As the helicopter drew closer, the enemy appeared on the ridge above, spotting them. Gunfire erupted, bullets ricocheting off the canyon walls. Avery pushed the civilians to the ground, returning fire when necessary, buying just enough time for the helicopter to land safely in a cleared area below. One by one, the group ran toward the chopper. Avery carried the injured soldier, shouting instructions over the roar of the rotors. Bullets tore through the air, kicking up sand and debris. She dove onto the landing skid as the last civilian scrambled aboard, securing herself with a harness. The helicopter lifted off just as enemy fire intensified, missiles streaking past like fiery arrows. Avery watched the canyon shrink beneath them, her chest heaving. They were alive, but barely. Every second had been a battle, and every second had tested the limits of her courage. Once airborne, the pilot acknowledged her through the comms. "You made it, Captain. All accounted for?" Avery scanned the group. The civilians were shaken, but alive. The injured soldier groaned, relieved to be safe. Avery nodded grimly. Yes, all survived. The flight back to base was silent, heavy with exhaustion and the weight of what had transpired. Avery looked out the window at the desert below, scarred and smoldering from the night's chaos. Her mind replayed every decision, every risk, every life she had saved or almost lost. Survival was no longer just about skill. It was about resilience, instinct, and the will to keep going when everything seemed lost. Back at the base, medics rushed to tend to the injured. Civilians were evacuated to safe housing, their eyes wide with disbelief at the horrors they had escaped. Avery stood apart for a moment, letting the adrenaline drain from her body. She was alive, yes, but the battlefield would haunt her forever. Her commanding officer approached, placing a firm hand on her shoulder. "Captain Monroe, you did more than survive. You saved lives today." Avery nodded, but the words felt hollow against the images in her mind. The burning vehicles, the desperate faces, the chaos of war. She had survived, but at a cost she could never fully quantify. Later, in the quiet of the officers' quarters, Avery finally allowed herself a moment to breathe. She reviewed the intel she had gathered, every photograph, every coordinate. The mission had succeeded, but she knew the war itself was far from over. She had glimpsed the true face of conflict, the raw brutality that no training could fully prepare a soldier for. As she prepared her report for command, Avery thought of the civilians she had protected, the soldiers she had carried, and the endless desert she had crossed. Survival demanded everything she had, and yet she had emerged not just alive, but transformed. The battlefield had changed her, forged her into something stronger, sharper, and painfully aware of the fragility of life. Weeks later, back on U.S. soil, Avery walked through the familiar corridors of a military base. Everything seemed surreal. The calm, the order, the quiet. She had returned from hell, yet a part of her remained in the desert, among the echoes of explosions and the cries of the wounded. She received letters from family and friends, their words warm and comforting, but Avery knew that nothing could erase the memory of what she had endured. The war had left scars, on the land, on the people, and on her own soul. Yet in those scars, she found a new purpose. Avery decided to share her story, to tell the untold narratives of survival, courage, and humanity amidst chaos. She would ensure that the lessons of war were not forgotten, that the lives touched by conflict would be remembered, and that the bravery of ordinary people forced into extraordinary circumstances would never go unnoticed. Standing at the edge of a quiet training field, watching the sunset, Avery finally allowed herself to exhale fully. The war had tested her beyond measure, but she had survived, and in that survival, she discovered a truth she would carry forever. Courage is not the absence of fear, it is moving forward despite it. End of part 4. Closing hook. As the sky burned orange and red, Avery knew the battlefield might be behind her, but the shadows of war lingered. The world had changed, and she had changed with it. And somewhere deep in the distance, a new mission awaited, one that would test her courage, resolve, and humanity once again.